Every sound seemed amplified, each step a potential trigger. A sudden roar echoed, raw and unrelenting, shaking the air. Then came the charge. Unstoppable, primal, and final. Hello everyone. Welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's stories, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to stay updated with future stories. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into the first attack. The early morning mist still clung to the trees as I walked deeper into the Great Smoky Mountains, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling the air. It was a cool, crisp day, the kind of morning that beckoned you to explore, to lose yourself in the solitude of the woods. I hadn't meant to venture this far out when I'd left my house in Knoxville, but the blackberries were ripe for picking, and the thrill of foraging always brought me a sense of peace. I was alone, and the silence around me felt like a comfortable embrace. My name is Carla Jameson, and I'm a nurse by trade. I spend most of my adult life working in hospitals, patching up wounds, soothing the broken. It's ironic, then, that I found my peace in the woods, away from the sterile, controlled chaos of my job. But out here, I was just a person. No scrubs, no stethoscope, no responsibilities beyond the simple task of filling my basket with wild fruit. The hike had been uneventful. I'd passed a few hikers along the way, their faces flushed with the joy of being out in nature. But as I ventured off the main trail and into a secluded valley, the forest became quieter. The usual sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, seemed to vanish. A strange stillness settled over the land, and I felt it in my bones, a tightening sensation that made me pause. Probably just my imagination, I murmured to myself, shaking my head as I bent down to inspect a patch of blackberries growing thick and ripe on a cluster of thorny bushes. The berries were perfect, glistening black, each one swollen with juice. I popped one into my mouth, savoring the tart sweetness, and I couldn't help but smile. There was something about picking your own food, straight from nature, that felt so primal, so grounding. I reached for another handful, moving with practiced ease. The sound of the wind in the trees was comforting, almost hypnotic. And then it happened. The sudden rustle behind me snapped me back to reality, sending a bolt of panic through my chest. I straightened up, my heart hammering in my throat. I had heard that sound, clear and unmistakable. Something big moving through the brush, something with weight, something that wasn't just a squirrel or a deer. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. Nothing, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, movement, a dark shape slipping through the underbrush, its massive form barely visible through the thick foliage. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as the creature stepped into view. It was a black bear. The bear was huge, easily standing 6 feet tall if it reared up. Its fur was matted and dark, its shoulders broad and muscular. It sniffed the air, its large nose twitching as it took in the scent of the berries. For a moment, I thought it might just keep moving, that I could slowly back away, and everything would be fine. But then its eyes met mine. There's a moment when time seems to slow down, when everything around you fades away, and all that remains is the feeling of dread, pure, unfiltered fear. That was the moment I saw the bear's eyes. Cold, calculating, predatory. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was not some gentle creature just passing through the forest. This was an animal, wild and untamed, responding to its instincts, and I was in its path. I didn't think, I reacted. My feet moved before my brain could catch up, and I stumbled backward, heart racing. "No, no, no," I whispered, too terrified to even scream. My fingers fumbled for my phone, but I knew there was no time to call for help. The bear was too close, too fast. It growled, a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Its ears flattened against its head, and its teeth flashed in the dappled sunlight as it took a step toward me. I tried to back up further, but my foot caught on a root hidden in the underbrush, and I went down hard onto my knee. A sharp, searing pain shot through my leg, and I cried out, scrambling to regain my footing. But it was too late. The bear lunged. The strike was like a thunderclap, its massive paw slashing through the air and catching me across my calf. The impact sent a shock wave of pain through my body as the claws dug deep into my skin, tearing through muscle and tendon with a sickening ripping sound. I could feel the blood warm and sticky, seeping through my jeans, but I couldn't focus on that. All I could do was scream. I twisted away, trying to crawl toward the trees, but the bear was on me. It wasn't frantic, wasn't wild. It was deliberate, its movements calculated. It batted at me again, but I managed to roll out of the way, my hands scraping against the rough ground. The bear grunted, then stopped, sniffing the air again, almost like it was deciding whether to finish the job. My head swam with dizziness, and I could barely catch my breath. The pain in my leg was unbearable, but I forced myself to look up. The bear had stopped advancing, but it was still watching me, its heavy breathing the only sound in the stillness. I could feel its gaze burning into me, its presence looming over me like an unspoken threat. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear turned. It grunted once more, its eyes lingering on me for a long moment, before it backed away slowly, disappearing into the underbrush. The sound of its heavy steps grew fainter, and eventually it was gone. I lay there in the dirt, gasping for air, my legs throbbing with pain. My mind was a blur of panic and disbelief. The woods, once a place of peace, now felt like a trap, and all I could think about was getting out, getting away. But there was no easy way out. I tried to stand, my leg buckling beneath me as I collapsed back to the ground. The pain was too much, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. I had to move. I had to get help. With my hands shaking, I pulled myself up, gritting my teeth against the agony. The bear was gone, but I wasn't safe. Not yet. I knew I had to get to the ranger station, to the trailhead, to anything that could save me. But as I limped away, every step a reminder of the bear's attack. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was still watching, still waiting. The world around me had faded into a haze of pain, adrenaline, and disbelief. I limped through the forest, my leg burning with each agonizing step, the blood soaking through my jeans, the pain from the bear's claws making my vision blur. My breath came in shallow gasps, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out of here. I had to get help. The stillness of the woods had changed. Where before it had been quiet and tranquil, now it felt oppressive, like the trees themselves were closing in on me. My mind was swimming, trying to keep track of my surroundings, but all I could think about was the searing pain in my leg. The gash the bear had left was deep, too deep, and I could feel the blood trickling down my calf, pulling in my boot. I knew I had to get to the ranger station or the trailhead, anywhere where I could find help. But everything seemed miles away. The forest, once familiar, now felt like an endless labyrinth, its paths twisting and turning, offering no escape. Focus, Carla. Keep moving, I muttered under my breath. I gritted my teeth, pushing through the pain, forcing myself to put one foot in front of the other. The weight of each step felt unbearable, and I could feel my knees shaking beneath me. A sharp, hot throb shot through my leg, and I stumbled, barely catching myself against a tree. My head spun. I was dizzy, nauseous, and the ground felt like it was swaying beneath me. Couldn't stop, couldn't fall here. I had no idea what would happen if I passed out alone in the woods. I glanced behind me, half expecting the bear to be stalking me, but the forest was still. Nothing, but the silence was unnerving. I pressed forward, using the trees for support, each step of battle against the pain. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in a way that almost sounded like whispers, like the forest itself was trying to tell me something. I shook my head, trying to focus. I couldn't afford to lose it. Not now. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of stumbling through the woods, I saw a faint glimmer of light through the trees ahead. The trailhead. I was close. I could make it, but my body was protesting every inch. I paused for a moment, leaning against a large pine, trying to steady my breath. My heart thudded in my chest, and I could feel the hot, sticky blood running down my leg. The pain was so intense, my vision was starting to swim again, and I could feel myself getting lightheaded. I needed help. I needed it now. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking hands and, for a moment, stared at the cracked screen. My hands were slick with blood, my fingers trembling, but I somehow managed to hit the button for emergency services. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I had to get their attention quickly. The phone rang, the sound deafening in my ears, and I prayed that someone would pick up. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. I've been attacked by a bear, I said, my voice breaking. I'm in the Great Smoky Mountains, and my leg is, I don't know if I can make it out. I need help. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a new voice, stronger, more authoritative, came through. Stay calm. We're sending a ranger to your location. Are you at the trailhead? Can you see the main path? I sucked in a breath, trying to steady my mind. No, I'm still in the woods. I'm trying to get to the trailhead. But I'm not sure if I can make it. All right? The voice replied. Don't move. We'll have someone there shortly. Stay on the line with me. Okay? I nodded, even though I knew they couldn't see me. Okay. But as I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, a wave of dizziness hit me, and the ground seemed to shift beneath me again. My knees buckled. I collapsed to the dirt, the phone falling from my hand and slipping just out of reach. The pain was becoming too much. I couldn't think straight. Every breath was a struggle. I couldn't stop the tremors in my body, couldn't stop my mind from spiraling into a dark place. The forest, the bear, the blood, it was all too much. Focus, Carla, I whispered, clenching my jaw. I had to get to the trailhead. I couldn't let myself fall unconscious here. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone again, dragging myself toward it. I heard the operator's voice still on the line, but my own breath was too loud in my ears. I was too weak, and the thought of giving up, of just lying here, was tempting. But I had to keep going. I couldn't let the bear's attack be the end of me. Forcing myself to sit up, I pulled myself to my feet again. This time, my steps were slower, more deliberate. My leg was screaming at me, and each movement felt like I was dragging a weight behind me. But somehow, I kept going. After what felt like hours, I saw it, the ranger station, barely visible through the trees. Relief flooded through me, but there was no time to waste. I stumbled forward, ignoring the pain that threatened to overtake me, focusing solely on the small building just ahead. When I finally reached it, I nearly collapsed against the door. My hands were slick with blood, and I could feel my knees buckling beneath me. But I forced myself to raise my fist and pound on the door. Help, please, I screamed, my voice hoarse and desperate. It only took a few moments before the door creaked open, and a ranger stood in front of me. His face went pale the moment he saw my leg. What happened? He asked, his voice sharp with concern as he rushed to support me. A bear, I gasped, my voice shaking with exhaustion. Didn't attacked me. The ranger's eyes widened, and without a word, he helped me inside. We're going to take care of you, he said, his voice steady now. He moved quickly, calling for backup on the radio as he examined my leg. Stay with me, okay? He said, looking me in the eyes. You're going to be okay, Carla. We're getting you out of here. I nodded weakly, trying to focus on his words, but everything felt distant, blurry. My leg was on fire, and I couldn't keep my eyes open for much longer. I felt the sharp sting of an antiseptic wipe against my leg, but it didn't register. Nothing did except the dull ache, the coldness, and the lingering fear that had settled deep in my chest. We'll get you to the clinic, the ranger said again, his tone firm but kind. As he worked quickly to stabilize me, I tried to focus on one thing: surviving this. The rest, the bear, the woods, the attack. It all felt so distant now. All I could think about was making it out of here safe. But the memory of the bear's eyes, cold and calculating, stayed with me, burning into my mind like a nightmare that wouldn't fade. I don't remember much of the ride to the clinic. The pain from my leg was all-consuming, a constant throb that dulled everything else around me. I could feel the cold metal of the ranger's truck seat beneath me, but it was distant, like I wasn't fully there. My vision blurred in and out, and I had to focus on my breathing to keep myself from slipping into unconsciousness. I heard the ranger talking to someone on his radio, but his words were muffled, as if underwater. Bear attack, need immediate assistance, was all I caught before the world seemed to spin again, and I had to close my eyes. When the truck finally stopped, I was barely aware of it. I was too consumed by the ache in my leg and the dark tunnel of exhaustion that threatened to swallow me. The ranger helped me out of the truck, his hands steady as he guided me toward the clinic entrance. I tried to lift my head, to understand what was happening, but my body was rebelling against me. "We're here, Carla. Stay with me. Okay?" The ranger's voice sounded distant, but I nodded weakly. He guided me inside, and the smell of antiseptic and old linoleum floors hit me immediately, sharp and sterile. It reminded me too much of the hospital I worked at, only this was different. Here I was the patient, not the nurse. A nurse in scrubs greeted us at the door. She was young, probably in her 20s, and she looked at me with wide eyes, taking in the sight of my leg. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. The ranger didn't wait for me to answer. "Bear attack. We need immediate care. There's a deep laceration, likely muscle and tendon damage. She's in shock. We need to stabilize her." His tone was clipped, professional. The nurse nodded quickly, but there was a moment of hesitation before she moved to fetch supplies. I felt a wave of frustration rise up in me. This was my life, my body, and these people were acting as if I were just another case to check off. I wanted to scream at them, to make them understand the gravity of what had happened to me, but my strength was fading. The only thing I could do was grit my teeth and endure. A second nurse, an older man with graying hair, came into the room, his eyes assessing me with practiced efficiency. He motioned to the young nurse, who began cutting away the fabric of my jeans, exposing the raw, torn flesh beneath. I winced, but couldn't summon the energy to flinch. "We're going to need to clean this up," the older nurse said, his voice low, "and get some antibiotics in her system. The bear's claws could have left bacteria, and we don't want infections setting in. Don't forget the pain meds," the ranger added, his voice hard. "She's been through hell. You have to make sure she's comfortable. Scars." The doctor gave me a small, tight smile. "We'll take care of you now. You're safe here." But his words felt hollow, the promise of safety feeling like a distant, unattainable thing. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. The next morning, I woke up in a hospital bed with a heavy bandage wrapped around my leg. The pain was a dull, constant throb, but it was bearable, a quiet reminder of the violence that had been done to me. My body felt sore, stiff, and disjointed, as though I had been hit by a truck. I tried to sit up, but the world spun, forcing me to lie back down. The sterile white walls of the small hospital room did little to comfort me. Everything felt wrong. I turned my head to the side and saw a familiar face. Kevin, my husband, sitting in a chair beside the bed. His eyes were red, his face drawn, as though he hadn't slept in days. His hand rested on the arm of the chair, his fingers twitching as if he were unsure of what to do with himself. "Carla," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "Thank God you're awake." I opened my mouth to respond, but my throat was dry, sore. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "What happened? How long have I been out?" Kevin's face tightened. "They put you under to clean the wounds. You've been out for about 15 hours. His eyes filled with worry, his gaze dropping to my leg. You scared the hell out of me, Carla. When I heard what happened, He stopped, shaking his head as though trying to keep the emotion in check. I wanted to reassure him, but my mind was still hazy. The bear attack seemed so distant now, as though it had happened to someone else. But the jagged pain in my leg was a constant reminder that it had been real. The bear had been real. What did the doctor say? I managed to croak, my voice raspy. Kevin's expression shifted, and he hesitated for a moment before answering. They're keeping you here for observation. The bear did some serious damage, but they think you'll recover. They'll monitor for infection and keep you on antibiotics. I nodded slowly, taking it all in. But something wasn't right. The nagging feeling that I wasn't getting the full picture stirred in my gut. Did you hear anything about the bear? Did they track it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The thought of that bear still lurking out there, somewhere, made my skin crawl. Kevin shifted in his chair, his eyes darting away from mine. No, he said quietly. The authorities didn't seem to think it was a big deal. I mean, they said it was an isolated incident, that the bear must have been startled or hungry. They're not treating it as anything more serious. I blinked at him, the frustration rising in my chest. What do you mean, not a big deal? I asked, my voice growing more forceful. It attacked me. I'm lucky to be alive, Kevin. This isn't some freak accident. Kevin winced, his eyes softening with concern. I know, but the Rangers, they said there wasn't enough to go on. There's no way to prove it was an intentional attack. Bears don't just attack people unless they're threatened or provoked. I sat up slowly, the weight of the conversation sinking in. I wasn't threatening it, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. I was picking berries, Kevin. I wasn't bothering it. It just came out of nowhere. I know, Kevin replied, his tone gentle. I'm not saying it's your fault, Carla, but the way they see it, there's nothing they can do unless it happens again. I looked down at my bandaged leg, the anger bubbling inside me. How could they be so dismissive? How could they treat it like nothing? I had lived through a nightmare, and they were acting like it was just an accident, an isolated incident. The scar on my leg was proof. The pain was proof, but they wouldn't even take it seriously. I turned my head away from Kevin, looking out the small window of my room. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows over the parking lot below. People were going about their business, living their lives, and I was here, a survivor of an attack that no one seemed to care about. Kevin didn't push me. He knew how stubborn I could be. I know you're frustrated, he said softly, but the authorities, they don't always do much unless there's a real threat. The bear's probably gone by now. They're not going to send the team out to hunt it down. I wanted to scream, to tell him that they were wrong, that the bear was still out there and still dangerous. But I didn't. What could I say? It wasn't like I had any proof. Just the deep, jagged scars on my leg and the memory of the claws tearing through my flesh. That was all I had. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to push the frustration down. I'm going to be okay, right? I asked, looking back at Kevin, my voice small. Yeah, you're going to be fine, Kevin said, his voice soft but steady. It's going to take time, but you'll heal. You're strong, Carla. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the truth was, a part of me was broken, and it wasn't something time could fix. No amount of physical recovery would erase the fear, the terror of what had happened. It was lodged deep in my bones, a fear that would follow me everywhere I went, a reminder of how fragile life was, how easily it could be taken away. The door to the room creaked open, and a nurse stepped inside, carrying a clipboard. She had a professional smile on her face, but there was something almost mechanical about it. She didn't look like someone who was truly concerned about me, just a person doing her job. "Good morning, Miss Jameson," she said brightly, though her eyes flicked to my leg for only a second before she turned to Kevin. "How are we feeling today?" Not great, I muttered, my irritation creeping in again. I'm just trying to process all this. She nodded sympathetically but didn't engage further with me. Instead, she turned to the chart at the foot of my bed and scribbled something down. The doctor will be in to check on you in a bit. They're just making sure the swelling goes down. You'll be discharged in the next couple of days, provided everything checks out. I didn't feel reassured. The idea of being sent home without any real answers, without even the authorities taking action, left me feeling exposed, vulnerable. What if the bear came back? What if it attacked someone else? Thank you, Kevin said to the nurse, his voice polite but distant. She nodded, flashing a quick smile before exiting, the door clicking softly shut behind her. For a long moment we were silent. Kevin's gaze wandered to the window, then back to me. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts. I know you want answers, Carla, he said after a while, his voice low. But sometimes the world doesn't give you the answers you want. Sometimes you just have to take what's left and try to move forward. I wanted to snap at him, to tell him that moving forward didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. But I couldn't. There was nothing more to say. The door opened again, and this time it was a familiar face, the local ranger who had first responded to my call. His uniform was slightly wrinkled, his face tired. He looked like someone who had been running on fumes for days. Ms. Jameson, he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I'm surviving, I replied flatly, but I'm still not sure why the bear attacked me. The ranger shifted uncomfortably. We're still looking into it, he said, his voice careful. But the authorities have concluded that it was likely a one-time thing. Bears are unpredictable, especially in the late summer when food is scarce. I looked at him, trying to read his expression. A one-time thing, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure I believe that. The ranger met my gaze. I understand, but unless it happens again, there's not much more we can do. We've issued a report. That's all we can do for now. I nodded slowly, the words sinking in like stones in my chest. The bear was out there somewhere, and I would always wonder if it would come back. The morning of my discharge from the hospital came too quickly. The pain in my leg had dulled to a manageable ache, but the emotional scars felt far deeper. I wasn't ready to go home. Not yet. I hadn't even begun to process everything that had happened. My thoughts were still tangled in the events of the previous day, still haunted by the bear's claws raking across my skin, the feeling of helplessness as it towered over me. Kevin had tried to be comforting, but his words felt hollow. The authorities hadn't done anything, and the ranger had made it clear that they weren't pursuing the bear. It had been deemed an isolated incident. I could feel my frustration growing with every passing minute. The nurse came in with the discharge papers just as I was staring out the window. The landscape of the Great Smoky Mountains sprawling in the distance, peaceful and serene, felt like a betrayal. I had almost died in those mountains, and now the world was continuing as if nothing had happened. Ms. Jameson, the nurse said gently, her voice breaking through my thoughts. We're just about ready to discharge you. The doctor's signing off on your paperwork now. How are you feeling? I turned toward her, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Better, I guess, but I hesitated, not sure if I should say it out loud. But it doesn't feel like enough has been done, like no one is taking it seriously. The nurse paused, a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't sympathy, but it wasn't indifference either. She set the paperwork down on the table beside my bed. I understand, Ms. Jameson, but you know how it is. These things are, well, and authorities can only act when there's clear proof of a threat. I could feel the familiar ache in my chest, the sting of being unheard. But there is proof. I'm proof. My leg is proof. She nodded, but it was a quick, dismissive gesture. I know, but they need more than that. The bear is probably long gone by now, and, well, there's not much that can be done unless it happens again. I wanted to yell at her, to scream that the bear could be out there, still lurking, still dangerous. But I held my tongue. What was the point? She wasn't the one I needed to convince. It was the authorities, the rangers, the people who were supposed to protect us. As the nurse left, Kevin leaned forward in his chair, concern etched on his face. "You okay?" he asked quietly. His gaze flicked to the discharge papers. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile again. Just ready to go home." The drive back to Knoxville was long and quiet. Kevin tried to make small talk, but his words felt distant, as though we were both living in different worlds. I was still back in the mountains, still feeling the bear's breath on my skin. He was in the here and now, worried about what I'd eat for lunch or whether I needed anything from the store. When we finally arrived at our house, I didn't know what to do with myself. The place felt so normal, so peaceful. Nothing like the chaos I'd experienced just 24 hours ago. The walls of the house seemed to close in on me, suffocating me with their normalcy. Kevin helped me inside, steadying me as I limped toward the couch. I sat down heavily, my leg throbbing in protest. He grabbed a pillow and placed it under my foot to elevate it. "I'll make you some tea," he said, trying to sound upbeat. "You should rest. The doctor said you need to take it easy for a few days." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to care about tea or rest. I was still trapped in the memories of the attack. The sound of the bear's growl, the heat of its breath, the overwhelming terror. I closed my eyes, trying to push it away, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. Kevin returned a few minutes later with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, setting it on the table in front of me. "Carla, you need to talk to someone about what happened. A counselor, maybe? I know this was traumatic. I don't want you to bottle it up." I looked at the tea, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. "I don't need a counselor," I muttered, frustration creeping into my voice. "I need the authorities to do their job. I need them to do something about the bear. No one's taking this seriously, Kevin." Kevin exhaled slowly, sitting down beside me on the couch. He ran a hand through his hair, looking as if he didn't know how to fix this. "I get it, but the authorities, they just don't see it the way you do. They won't go looking for a bear unless there's a bigger threat." "That's not right," I snapped, my hands clenched into fists. "I'm the threat. I'm the one who was attacked, and now I'm supposed to just forget it." Kevin's face softened with sympathy, but there was a resignation in his eyes. "I'm not saying you should forget it, but you can't make them do something they're not going to do. I'm sorry, Carla. I really am." I turned away from him, staring out the window. The same mountains that had been the setting of my nightmare now seemed to mock me with their serenity. That afternoon, I decided to call the ranger station. It had been on my mind ever since I left the hospital, the frustration gnawing at me. The bear hadn't just disappeared. It was still out there, and if I had my way, they'd take it seriously, even if they hadn't yet. I wasn't going to just sit back and wait for the next person to get attacked. I dialed the number, the ringing tone stretching out longer than it should have. Finally, a voice picked up. "Ranger Station. How can I help you?" "This is Carla Jameson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I was attacked by a bear yesterday in the Great Smoky Mountains. I was told it was an isolated incident, but I'm not convinced. I want to report it again. I need something done." There was a brief pause on the other end, and I could almost hear the ranger's sigh before he spoke. "Miss Jameson, we've already logged your report. It's been noted, but there's not much more we can do unless there's more evidence of an immediate threat. A bear doesn't just attack without cause. It's likely gone back to its territory by now. But what if it's not?" Impressed. "What if it comes back? What if someone else gets hurt?" "Miss Jameson, we understand your concerns, but right now, there's nothing we can do." The words felt like a slap in the face. "So that's it? You're just going to let it go? You're going to let this thing roam free because it doesn't suit your timeline?" There was a pause on the other end, but no further explanation. "I'm sorry, Miss Jameson. That's all we can do at this point." I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of defeat settle over me. There was no closure, no resolution, just an empty silence where justice should have been. Days passed, and with each one, the weight of the bear's attack pressed down harder on me. I tried to get back into the rhythm of my life, but nothing felt the same. I couldn't step outside without feeling the thrum of anxiety pulsing through me, like the bear was always lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for its next victim. I avoided the woods altogether, even the small patch of forest behind our house. Kevin did his best to reassure me, but his words always felt empty. He had no idea what it felt like to be face to face with something so primal, so terrifying, something that could tear your life apart in an instant. I didn't even think he truly understood why it bothered me so much. He hadn't been there, hadn't felt the bear's weight pressing down on him, its growl reverberating through the air. I stayed in most days watching the news or reading, trying to distract myself. The memory of the attack kept creeping back, though. I'd close my eyes and see the dark, wet sir, the long claws slicing through the air. And then there was the silence after it retreated, that quiet, hollow space where the terror had been. But the world outside didn't care. The authorities had swept the incident under the rug, and as far as the rest of Knoxville was concerned, nothing had happened. It was like it was already forgotten. The phone call I had made to the ranger station hadn't done anything. No follow-up, no investigation, no sign of anyone trying to track the bear. I felt powerless, like I was fighting against a wall that would never budge. And worst of all, Kevin had stopped talking about it, as though it had become something he couldn't fix either. It was Thursday afternoon when I finally decided to do something on my own. "I'm going back to the mountains," I said one evening, as Kevin sat on the couch, flipping through a sports channel. His eyes didn't leave the screen as I spoke. "What? Why?" he asked, still distracted by the game. "I can't keep waiting around, Kevin. The bear is still out there, and no one is doing anything about it. If I have to go up there and find it myself, I will." My voice was firm, but underneath, there was a tremor. The thought of going back to the place where I had almost died was terrifying, but it felt like the only way to reclaim some control. Kevin didn't respond immediately, and I could feel his tension rising as the silence stretched out. Finally, he set the remote down and turned to me. "Carla," he said, his voice low, "you're still recovering. You're not thinking clearly. Going back up there won't change anything. Please, let it go." "I can't," I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm not going to let this go, Kevin. It's not just going to disappear, and neither will I." Kevin exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "You're not going alone. Not after what happened. I won't let you." I felt my chest tighten. I didn't need Kevin's permission, but I didn't want to fight him either. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm just telling you what I need to do." Kevin looked away, his jaw clenched. I knew that look. He wasn't going to argue anymore, but his silence spoke volumes. He was scared not just for me, but for himself. He couldn't bear the thought of losing me again. "I'll go with you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him surprised. "You will?" He nodded. "I don't want you going up there alone, but I'll go. We'll do this together." I could see the hesitation in his eyes, but he wasn't backing down. For the first time in days, I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this time I wouldn't have to face the terror alone. The drive to the Great Smoky Mountains the following day was silent. Kevin and I exchanged few words, both lost in our own thoughts. The landscape outside seemed to blur as I stared out the window, the trees growing denser, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was the same as the day I'd gone out to pick berries, but this time there was no peace, no serenity. We pulled up to the trailhead where I'd been attacked. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a couple of cars. A ranger was sitting in his truck, probably taking a break, but his eyes followed us as we stepped out of the car. He didn't say anything, just watched us as we walked toward the trail. "Carla?" Kevin said, his voice shaking a little. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, trying to push down the fear. The mountains seemed so beautiful from a distance, so quiet and welcoming. But up close, everything felt different, more threatening. "I have to know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have to know if the bear is still out here." Kevin didn't argue. He just nodded, his face pale, and followed me as we started down the trail. The familiar path was comforting, yet it also felt completely alien. I could almost hear the bear's growls in the wind, the crushing sound of its heavy footsteps in the underbrush. We reached the spot where I had been attacked. I stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The ground was still marked with a few broken branches, the faintest trace of a struggle. But there was nothing to suggest the bear had returned. The area was undisturbed. Kevin stepped up beside me, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. "Carla, there's nothing here. We should go back." I shook my head, my eyes scanning the trees. The bear had to be nearby, couldn't just vanish. "No," I said firmly. "It's here. I can feel it." The air seemed to hold its breath, and then, suddenly, I heard something. A snap of twigs underfoot, a rustle in the underbrush. My heart stopped. I froze, my body tense as I turned to Kevin. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Kevin looked around, his face pale. "It's just an animal, Carla. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The noise came again, closer this time, and then there was a low growl. Deep, menacing, unmistakable. The bear. I grabbed Kevin's arm, pulling him back toward the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. "We have to go. Now." We turned and ran, the growl still echoing in our ears, the fear surging through us. The trail seemed longer than I remembered, the path steeper, the winds darker. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my leg protesting every step, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. We reached the car, and Kevin fumbled for the keys, his hands shaking. "Hurry, Carla. Get in the car." I jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind me. Kevin threw the car into gear and sped off, not looking back. As we left the trail behind, I couldn't help but glance out the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the bear following us, its eyes glowing in the shadows. But there was nothing. No sign of the animal, only the silence. The drive back to Knoxville felt like the longest one I'd ever endured. Kevin barely said a word, his hands gripped tightly to the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. I could feel the hum of the engine beneath me, a constant reminder of the fear still lodged deep in my chest. We had escaped the bear, but it felt as though something had shifted, something broken in both of us. Kevin's silence was unnerving. He hadn't even protested when I insisted we leave the trailhead in such a hurry. The fear in his eyes had mirrored my own, and neither of us had dared to look back. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, shallow and rapid, as if I could still feel the bear's hot breath on my neck. "You think it's gone, don't you?" I asked quietly, staring out the window as we passed through the outskirts of Gatlinburg. Kevin didn't answer immediately, and I turned to glance at him. His face was pale, his eyes focused on the road ahead. He didn't look at me, but after a long pause, he finally spoke. "I don't know. I didn't hear it again, but I think we both know that doesn't mean it's gone. We just got lucky." I nodded, my stomach tightening. "Dear, lucky." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breath. The minutes dragged on in that heavy silence, punctuated only by the hum of tires on asphalt. The thought of going back to that clinic, of going home and pretending everything was normal, felt impossible. It wasn't just the bear that had attacked me. It was the silence afterward, the feeling of being dismissed, of having no one believe me. I hadn't imagined the bear. It had been real, but the world seemed intent on pretending it had never happened. When we finally made it back to our house, I didn't feel any relief. If anything, the familiar comfort of home made it worse. It was like everything was just as it should be, and yet I wasn't. I wasn't the same person who had gone into the woods 2 days ago. That woman didn't exist anymore. I stepped out of the car and looked at the house, taking a deep breath. "I don't think I can just forget it, Kevin," I said quietly. "This isn't over. Not for me." Kevin was already at the door, his hand on the handle, but he paused at my words. "I know it's not, but what do you want me to do? We can't fight this. The bear is out there, yeah, but there's nothing we can do unless it attacks again. And even then, what happens?" I didn't have an answer. What did happen? The world would just move on, wouldn't it? The bear would either leave the area or stay hidden, and people would forget. It would be like all the other isolated incidents, forgotten until the next one. The sharp thought cut through me like a knife. I wasn't the only one who had been through this. I wasn't the only one who had been hurt by a bear, or by something bigger, more invisible. And when they walked away, when they left the woods behind, nothing changed. No one ever heard them. No one ever cared. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to let it go. I called the local news station. Maybe they wouldn't take me seriously either, but I had to try. I had to speak up. I didn't expect much, but when the receptionist picked up, I was surprised by how quickly she transferred me to a reporter. "Kano, this is Kayla from Channel 5. The woman's voice crackled over the line. "How can I help you?" "I was hoping to talk about an attack in the Great Smoky Mountains," I said, my voice shaking but steady. "A bear attacked me 2 days ago. I want to tell my story. I want people to know what happened." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Kayla's skeptical glance. "A bear attack? Are you sure it wasn't just a misunderstanding? Bears don't typically attack unless they're provoked, you know." The defensive tone in her voice sparked anger in me, but I kept my cool. I was picking berries. It wasn't provoked. It attacked me. "I need you to understand that it happened, and I'm not the only one. If the authorities won't do anything about it, maybe you can help." Kayla sighed, clearly not impressed. All right, come down to the station and we can talk about it. But I'll need you to have some proof, okay? Otherwise, it's just a he said, she said situation." Proof. I could already hear the words echo in my head. They weren't going to take me seriously until I had something they could see. My injuries weren't enough. My story wasn't enough. Not yet, but I agreed, biting back the bitterness that threatened to overtake me. "I'll be there." Kevin drove me to the news station later that afternoon. I wanted to be the one to drive, to take some control back, but Kevin insisted. "You're still recovering," he said, and I didn't argue. He hadn't said much since we got back from the mountains, but I could tell he was as frustrated as I was. He just didn't know how to help. When we arrived, I was immediately ushered into a small meeting room with a reporter named Kayla. She was older than I expected. Early 30s, with sharp eyes and a quick smile that didn't seem to reach her eyes. "So, Ms. Jameson," she said, her voice professional but clipped, "tell me exactly what happened. Start from the beginning." I took a deep breath and launched into my story. I told her about the day I'd gone to pick blackberries, the quiet beauty of the mountain trail, the sudden appearance of the bear, and how it attacked me without warning. I described every moment as best I could. The way it had circled around me, the deep cuts across my leg, the terror that had seized me when I saw those dark eyes staring into mine. Kayla listened in silence, taking notes, but I could tell she was already starting to lose interest. She wasn't moved by my words, not the way I needed her to be. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "Well, we've had a few reports of bear sightings in that area, but attacks like this are rare. I mean, it's not unheard of, but we'd need more evidence to make a real story out of it. Do you have photos of your injuries?" I pulled up my sleeve and showed her the scars on my leg, the ones the hospital had carefully bandaged and stitched. The thick red lines were still visible, and they stood out against my pale skin. Kayla nodded, but her gaze was distant, non-committal. "This is serious, Ms. Jameson," she said slowly. But without more concrete proof, something like a trail cam image or the bear's tracks, we can't run a story on it. I felt a deep wave of frustration rise in me, but I forced it down. "You don't believe me, do you?" I asked quietly. Caleb blinked, clearly taken aback. "It's not that, it's just, we need something more tangible to go on. No one will pay attention unless there's proof." I looked at her for a long moment, my heart sinking. "Then it's over, isn't it? It doesn't matter what I say." She didn't answer, and I knew right then that she wouldn't. Without the kind of proof that could be paraded on television, without something that could be touched and seen, my story was just another forgotten one, another isolated incident that would fade into the background. When I left the station, I didn't feel any relief. I didn't feel any closure. It was as if the world was still moving on, and I was stuck, left behind. "Did it go okay?" Kevin asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. "No," I said, my voice hollow. "No one cares." The aftermath of the bear attack had settled into a strange kind of limbo. The physical pain from the wounds had faded, though the scars were a constant reminder. They weren't just the marks on my leg. They were the imprint of something much deeper, something invisible but impossible to ignore. Every time I looked at my reflection, I saw not just the scars but the person I had become. A woman who had seen the wildness of nature up close, who had stared death in the face and come back broken, but still alive. In the days that followed, life carried on around me, but it felt like a different world. Kevin had tried to return to normal as well. He'd suggested I go back to work, but I couldn't. I couldn't face the patients, the routines, the mundane distractions that felt so trivial now. The attack had shattered something in me. The hospital could wait. I needed time to breathe, to process, and to face the terrifying reality that no one cared about what had happened. Not really. I hadn't returned to the mountains. Not once. And part of me knew I never would. Not without a reason. But what reason was there left? The bear hadn't been caught. No one had even tried to find it. The authorities had moved on. They always did. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. No one cared. Not truly. Not unless something more dramatic happened. Another attack. Another tragedy. I could feel my heart sink every time I thought about the news station and the way Kayla had dismissed me. She hadn't believed me. It was clear in her eyes. It didn't matter that I'd been scarred. It didn't matter that I was telling the truth. If it didn't make a sensational story, then it wasn't worth their time. A few days after my conversation with Kayla, Kevin came home from work early, his face drawn with a tiredness that mirrored my own. He'd always been the strong one, the protector. He was the one who had insisted on accompanying me to the mountains, the one who had been there for me after the attack. But now he looked like he was running on empty. "Carla, we need to talk," he said as he walked into the living room. His voice was low, a bit hesitant. I looked up from the window where I'd been staring for who knows how long. "About what?" His eyes flickered briefly to the door, then back to me. "About what you're going to do now." I swallowed, trying to suppress the lump that had formed in my throat. I had been hoping he wouldn't bring this up. Not yet, but I knew it was coming. "I'm not going back," I said softly. "I don't think I can, Kevin. I don't want to." He nodded, sitting down beside me on the couch. "I know. I don't want you to either. But it's been a week now, Carla. The wounds are healing, you're getting better, but you haven't really moved forward. And neither have I." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like I was intentionally holding on to the past. It wasn't like I wanted to be stuck in that moment forever. But it was like a shadow had settled over me, and no matter how I tried, it wouldn't leave. "I know you're scared," Kevin continued, his voice soft but urgent. "I get that, but you can't keep hiding in here. You have to." "I'm not siding." The words shot out before I could stop them. "You think I'm just sitting here, waiting for this to blow over? You think I'm not trying to move on?" Kevin flinched at my outburst, but his expression didn't harden. It softened, like he understood something I didn't want to admit. I'm not saying that, Carla, but the world doesn't stop just because we're scared, does it? I exhaled slowly, running a hand through my hair. I didn't know how to explain it to him. I couldn't just flip a switch and make myself feel whole again. The bear hadn't just attacked my body. It had attacked my sense of safety, my belief that I was in control. And that was something I wasn't sure how to get back. I don't think you understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. No one cares. The authorities, the news station, they don't care. They won't even believe me unless there's proof. And even then, they'll forget. Kevin reached out, his hand resting gently on mine. I know it feels like that, but you're wrong. People do care. Cheer. And if you want to do something, I'll help you. But you can't keep fighting it on your own. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I turned my gaze to him, my heart aching with frustration. I don't know if I can move on. How can I? Every time I close my eyes, I see the bear's face. I see the claws, the teeth. I hear that growl. I can't shake it. I can't forget. Kevin stayed silent for a long time, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything. But then he finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to keep living. Even with the fear, even with the scars. You're still here, Carla. You're still breathing. And that matters. I didn't know how to respond. How could I, when all I felt was empty? The fear had become part of me now. The bear had left its mark, not just on my leg, but on my soul. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't erase it. The next day, I went into town. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because I felt like I couldn't stay cooped up inside any longer. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't completely lost, that I could still function, still be a part of the world. I stopped by the small grocery store to pick up a few things, trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone. I could feel their stares, the quiet sympathy that people gave when they thought I was some tragic figure. It was suffocating. As I turned the corner of the aisle, I ran into Mark, one of the local park rangers. He looked surprised to see me, but his face quickly shifted to concern. Carla, he said, stepping closer. I heard about what happened. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize it was that serious. I forced a smile. Yeah, it's been a rough couple of days. Are you okay? He asked, his gaze flickering down to my leg. I mean, really okay? The bear is still out there, you know. We've had some more reports from other hikers. The words hit me like a punch. More reports. I hadn't heard anything about that. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't think anyone's going to do anything about it. No one cares. Mark hesitated, looking around before lowering his voice. Look, Carla, I know you're frustrated, but we're doing everything we can. Is complicated. Bears don't just disappear. We have protocols, but we can't just go out there with guns blazing every time someone gets scratched. I felt the weight of his words settle over me, heavy and suffocating. I know, I whispered, but it doesn't feel like enough. Mark's expression softened. I know, but we're working on it. If you ever need to talk, just let me know. I nodded, grateful for his understanding, but still feeling the sting of abandonment. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want a listening ear. I wanted justice. I wanted action. But I had nothing. Nothing except my memories, and the scars that would stay with me forever. That night, I lay in bed next to Kevin, my body still, my mind racing. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that felt sick, suffocating. I thought about the bear, about everything, and I knew, deep down, that I would never forget. No matter what happened from here on out, it would always be there, to bear, the attack, the fear, the silence that followed.